When Jerry asked me to speak before this crowd for this special day, I was honored. I think it's an important day that we should recognize. However, we ought to recognize something called Camp Shanks. Now, Camp Shanks was the largest port of embarkation on the East Coast. And when the camp was developed, it was developed between January of 1943, but completed in May of 1943. So you could imagine what went on over here. Let's go back to September 25th of 1942, when 278 people were invited to attend a meeting. The meeting was held at the Greenbush School, and they were told that their parcel of land or their farm had been selected by the Army along Western Highway from Tappan, New York, Washington Street, all the way north to Blauvelt Road. And again, it's 278 parcels of land. They had 2 weeks to leave. And by the powers of the War Act, they had no choice, either sell their land to the government or be forced out. The government did say after the war, they were able or entitled to buy their land back if they so choose. So let's begin. In this slide, you see a number of gentlemen who represented the local government from Orangetown and from Rockland County. And they were approached for setting up a installation along here. It was carefully selected. And the reason was because it was on two rail lines. One was the West Shore Rail Line, which is now CSX, and the Erie Railroad, which went defunct back in September of 1966. It was also close to the Hudson River. And between here and the Hudson River is Cloudsley Mountains. So it was the perfect spot to have a military encampment begin. Well, these were the gentlemen that went before all these people whose property abutted along Western Highway. It was named Camp Shanks after Commander David Shanks, who was the commanding officer of Camp Merritt in World War I. Camp Merritt was located in Bergen County around Bergenfield and Teaneck, in and close that area. All right, wait, let's see. As you can see in this photograph, after the acquisition of all those parcels of land, the land was cleared. It was terrible to see because a lot of the little farms along the way had things like cabbages and still some corn coming in. And with the demolition, all the produce went under. In this slide, you see the camp as it was developed looking north. One of the last remaining trees. Wait, no, I'm sorry. All right, this is the camp looking west. I'm doing wrong. And one of the last remaining trees that that remained from the demolition. Here's another view of the barracks. It was expansive. When these barracks were created, when this camp was created, it was created large enough to contain 45,000 soldiers and a staff, a civilian staff of 5,000 people. So in many ways, it was a kind of a little city unto itself. So you had to accommodate all these people. This is what the camp looked like in the winter. The camp was supplied by a number of water towers, as you can see from this one, and some of the photographs were taken on top of the tower. We see a rail house over here where the trains came in. They came in 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They came in with men, they came in with supplies and equipment. Another view of the same house. There were a series of 5 railroad tracks that came through. And again, it was a very busy time. The trains came in, unloaded, went out again. They brought in soldiers from other parts of the country who were trained with the armory, who were trained with artillery. And all these soldiers were put together in Camp Shanks, making up a division and a regiment before they were shipped overseas. And when they were shipped overseas, it was usually the European theater. Here's one of the early trains with the soldiers lined up. They're here with their duffel bags and they're waiting to be shipped or walked or trucked over to Camp Shanks. The time for them to spend at Camp Shanks was anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 to 6 weeks. Here they are in the wintertime, leaving the train, heading for their encampment. Camp Shanks was so big that they had signposts indicating which way to go if you wanted a beer, if you wanted to make a telephone call, or if you're looking for theater. So they were posted around the encampment. I'm sorry. This is the inside of a typical barracks. As you can see, soldiers played cards, they smoked, they told stories, they were pretty cheerful. Here's the 1 millionth soldier at Camp Shanks. His name was James Fitzgerald. Don't forget, 1.3 million soldiers came through Camp Shanks. And, you know, periodically as town historian, I'm asked, do I have a list of all the soldiers that came through? The answer to that is no. And the only place I know of where that list might be in the United States Archives or in the Library of Congress. In order to entertain the soldiers, USO clubs were created. And this one is in Tappan. And you might know it because it's part of the Tappan Reformed Church. At these USO clubs, the soldiers enjoy a little of the music of the times and have a good time, because a lot of them didn't know if they were going to be coming back. The slide of some soldiers enjoying the Christmas time inside of the manse barn. And again, another photo of Christmas time being celebrated. This photo I don't think so. Another place the soldiers for entertainment was called the Victory Club. And the Victory Club was located right on the corner of Independence and Avenue and Lester Drive. There they could do a number of things. They could dance, write letters, just plain socialize and relax. Western Union came in, and they came in to help make the soldiers feel at home so that they could create telegraphs and send the telegraphs home to their families, to their girlfriends or whomever. Here's how it was done. It was done at booth with an assistant. And this is a typical booth with one of the soldiers being assisted. In this slide, an officer showing the service women how a telegraph really works. Here's some telegraph operators celebrating. There were also telephone service here, and some of these were telephone operators. There's two soldiers placing a call, probably to home. This is a picture of the Victory Club. It was a very active place, and they were a lot of these clubs were scattered around because you're looking at 45,000 soldiers who were in the area who needed to be entertained. Entertaining was great because people like Frank Sinatra came by and did some programs for them. There was a famous movie actress called Myrna Loy, and she came and entertained the soldiers. And Pearl Bailey and Cootie Williams. And here is the inside of the auditorium over at Rockland Psychiatric Hospital, where they entertained the Black troops. And Helen Hayes and some friends were escorted around Camp Shanks. They got a special guided tour. Another form of recreation was boxing. And here you see Joe Louis kind of sparring with his sparring mate. He's shaking hands with Colonel Riley. Baseball was another form of recreation. And here you see the Phillies playing the team camp, the Camp Shanks baseball team. There was a bowling alley in the basement of Rockland Psychiatric Hospital. And here you can also bowl as another form of entertainment. There was a newspaper that was printed almost every day. It was called the Palisades. And here's the editor and some of his writers. Camp Shanks was a very special place. It produced three well-known cartoonists. One of them was Bill Malden. You remember Bill Malden. Another fellow named Bill Wetzel. And the fellow who created Terry and the Pirates. They all came out of Camp Shanks. There were women called Wax that were also located here at Camp Shanks. Here we see them marching. This picture was not taken here at Camp Shanks, but close by. But there were also other ladies in the area that were assistant civilians who drove trucks and helped out with the supplies. Here we see a group of wax. And in this photograph, we see some wax boarding a ship heading for overseas. However, they were trained just in case their ship was torpedoed, how to abandon ship. Throughout the United States, oddly enough, there were 450,000 POWs. This photograph shows a group of German soldiers arriving at Camp Shanks. In this photograph, it shows a group of Italian POWs coming to Camp Shanks. The soldier without a hat in this slide, he's an Italian POW serving the troops at the mess hall. Here's some soldiers training. And it was a vigorous form of training. This slide shows the fellow who supposedly fired the last shot on VJ Day, August 1945. Here's Isaac. Sorry. Oh, Okay, thank you. Here's Eisenhower shaking hands with some troops for the 101st. He always had a good cup of coffee and a donut from the Red Cross. You were always signing in or out, and some of these soldiers were signing, leaving the camp, boarding a ship. After you got checked in on that ship, you were assigned a bunk, and this is what some soldiers look like in their bunk space. This is an interesting slide, and it shows an Italian POW and his family. They come to picnic at Camp Shanks, and the little girl on the far end came, I guess she was about 5, 6 years ago. She came to visit, and she wanted to see Camp Shanks, so she called the Orangetown Museum and asked if we could take her around to see where she might have been. And it was kind of surprising that after all these years, this older woman had remembered a very nice Sunday afternoon sharing a homemade Italian meal. It was the girl on the far end with her finger by her mouth that came by. Her name was Mariella. Here's some Black troops arriving back in Piermont. Piermont was called Last Stop USA, so they were all glad to get home. Here's some other troops coming back to Last Stop USA. However, they were greeted by some models that were lined up. They were from the Powers Modeling Agency. They were very tall, pretty girls greeting the soldiers as they stepped off the ship. The soldiers were then boarding trucks to take them back to Camp Shanks. Some soldiers who were wounded were taken to a hospital that was set up by the Army at Rockland Psychiatric Hospital. And as soon as they got settled and assessed, they were sent to hospitals in areas where they lived. The rest of the soldiers were walked or marched back to the camp. These soldiers are thrilled to be drinking a real glass of milk because overseas, coming into fresh milk was really premium. Very hard to find fresh milk. Here are the POWs being loaded on trains, getting ready to go back to their country. And another shot of the same. As I said, there were over 450,000 POWs in this country, so it took a while to send them on the East Coast. They were distributed all around the states, so it took a while for them to come to the East Coast and be shipped through Piermont. Here we see them boarding the ship, heading down the Hudson. Now, Camp Shanks is one of those places like Brigadoon. It kind of came and it went, but we shouldn't forget it. Nor did Scott Weber, who wrote a book about Camp Shanks. And it was through him that I inherited his slides, but it was through him that a book was written, but also a historic marker that's in front of the Orangetown Hall. Here it is. And here's a photo of Scott Weber. Least we not forget. That's the end of my talk. I hope you've enjoyed it. Any questions? I'm sorry, I can't hear too well.
What was the average length of time the soldiers were there?
I'm sorry?
What was the average length of time the soldiers were there?
And anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks. No, it's not, but don't forget. No, it's not a long time, but they were trained in other places. They were trained in other places and then brought here and then formed a division, and the division or the regiment went overseas as a whole. Mhm. I don't really know.
There is.
I would imagine there is.
There's a list on
List on the wall back there.
back there.
Okay,
Hi,
all right.
two questions. First
Sure.
off, we know that the Army was segregated at that point. What
Yes.
portion of Camp Shanks, if you can tell us in the terms of today's roads, would have been the housing for the African-American soldiers?
You're asking me where they were encamped at at
Yeah,
Camp Shanks?
what portion of the camp?
I honestly, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. Second question,
Mhm.
the prisoners of war, were they held in Camp Shanks for the duration, or was it just a holding place until they could take them to a more remote part of the country?
No, they were held here. They were held in two separate areas, one for the Germans and one for the Italians. Now, here's something interesting. The Italians were allowed to go out and work the farms because you could trust them. The Germans were not, because they'd always run away. Okay. Mhm. The families were here already. Some of them were in Brooklyn, some of them were in the Bronx, some of them were in Manhattan. So they kept in touch by letter, by word of mouth, by phone call. And here's something interesting. Sometimes the Italian POW was allowed to go to visit that family. He usually took a sergeant or another soldier with him. So they made sure he returned back to camp, always with a big plate of spaghetti. I'm sorry? Oh, yes, absolutely, absolutely. And
Right.
Ah.
Right.
Mhm. Oh. Oh, that's a good story.